Was It a Dream? By Guy De Maupassant. I loved her madly. Why does one love? Why does one love? How strange it is to see but one being in the world, to have but one thought in one's mind, one desire in the heart, and one name on the lips, a name that comes up continually, rising from the depths of the soul like water in a spring, and which one repeats over and over again, and murmurs ceaselessly everywhere, like a prayer. I'm not going to tell you our story. Love is always the same. I met her and loved her. That is all. And for a whole year, I lived in her tenderness, her caresses, in her arms, hung on her words and looks, loved her dresses, was so completely wrapped up, bound, imprisoned in everything that pertained to her, that I no longer knew whether it was day or night, if I was dead or alive, on this old earth of ours, or elsewhere. And then she died. How? I do not know. I no longer know. But one evening she came home wet, for it was raining heavily, and the next day she coughed, and she coughed for about a week and took to her bed. What happened I do not remember now, but doctors came, wrote prescriptions, and went away. Medicines were brought, and a woman made her drink them. Her hands were hot, her forehead was burning, and her eyes bright and sad. When I spoke to her, she answered me, but I do not remember what we said. I have forgotten everything. 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 She died, and I very well remember her little faint sigh, her last. The nurse said, "Ah!" and I understood. I understood. I knew nothing more. Nothing. I saw a priest who said, "Your sweetheart," and it seemed to me as if he were insulting her. As she was dead, nobody had the right to know our relationship, and I turned him out. Another came who was very kind and tender, and I shed tears when he spoke to me about her. They consulted me about the funeral, but I do not remember anything that they said, though I distinctly recall the coffin and the strokes of the hammer as they nailed her down in it. Oh, God! God! She was buried. Buried. She in that hole. Some people came, female friends. I made my escape and ran away. I ran, and then I walked through the streets, and finally went home. The next day, I started on a journey. Yesterday, I returned to Paris, and when I saw my room again, our room, our bed, our furniture, everything that remains of the life of a human being after death, I was seized by such a violent reoccurrence of grief that I came very near opening the window and throwing myself out into the street, as I could no longer remain in the midst of these things. Between these walls which had enclosed and sheltered her, and which retained 1,000 atoms of her, of her skin, and of her breath, in their imperceptible crevices, I took up my hat to make my escape, and just as I reached the door, I passed a large glass in the hall, which she had put there, so that she could look at herself every day from head to foot as she went out, to see if her toilet was in order, and was correct and pretty, from her leather boots to her hat. and I stopped short in front of that looking-glass, in which she had so often been reflected. So often, that it also must have retained her reflection. I was standing there, trembling, with my eyes fixed on the glass, on that flat, profound, empty glass, which had contained her entirely, and had possessed her as much as I had, as much as my passionate looks had. I felt as if I loved that glass. I touched it. It was cold. Oh, the recollection. Sorrowful mirror, burning mirror, live mirror, horrible mirror, which makes us suffer such torments. Happy are the men whose heart is like a mirror, when images glide and pass away, that forgets all it has contained, reflected, all that has basked in its love and affection. But I, how I suffer. I went out, and without knowing it, without wishing it, walked to the cemetery. I found a simple grave, a white marble cross with these few words: she loved, was beloved, and died. She was there, beneath the ground, decomposed. How horrible! I sobbed with my forehead to the ground. I remained there a long time. A long time. Then I saw that it was getting dark, and a strange, mad wish, the desire of a despairing lover, seized me. I wished to pass the night, the last night, in weeping on her grave. But I should be seen and driven out. How was I to manage? I was cunning. So I got up and began to roam about the city of the dead. I walked and walked. How small this city is in comparison with the other, the city in which we live. And yet, how much more numerous the dead are than the living. We require high houses, wide streets, and much room for the 4 generations who see the daylight at the same time, drink from the spring, wine from the vines, and eat the bread from the plains. And for all the generations of the dead, for all that ladder of humanity that is descended to us, there is scarcely anything, only a field, scarcely anything. The earth takes them back, oblivion effaces them. Adieu. At the end of the cemetery, I suddenly perceived the abandoned cemetery, where the dead have long since blended with the soil, where the crosses themselves decay, where the last comers will be put tomorrow. It is full of untended roses, of robust dark cypress trees, a sad and beautiful garden, nourished on human flesh. I was alone, perfectly alone. I hid in a leafy tree and concealed myself completely among the thick and somber branches, and waited, clinging to the trunk as a shipwrecked man does to a plank. When it was quite dark, I left my refuge and began to walk softly, slowly, noiselessly through the ground full of dead people. And I wandered about for a long time, but could not find her again. I went on with extended arms, knocking against the tombs with my hands, my feet, my knees, my chest, even with my head, without being able to find her. I touched and felt like a blind man groping his way. I felt the stones, the crosses, the iron railings, the metal wreaths, and the wreaths of faded flowers. I read the names with my fingers by passing them over the letters. What a night! What a night! I could not find her again. There was no moon. What a night! I was afraid, horribly afraid, in these narrow paths between two rows of graves. Graves, graves, graves! Nothing but graves! On my right, on my left, in front of me, around me, everywhere there were graves. I sat down on one of them, for I could not walk any longer. My knees were so weak, I could hear my heartbeat, and I could hear something else as well. What? A confused, nameless noise. Was the noise in my head, in the impenetrable light, or beneath the mysterious earth, the earth sown with human corpses? I looked about me, but I cannot say how long I remained there. I was paralyzed with terror, drunk with fright, ready to shout out, ready to die. Suddenly, it seemed to me as if the slab of marble on which I was sitting was moving. Certainly, it was moving, as if it were being raised. With a bound, I sprang onto the neighboring tomb, and I saw, yes, I distinctly saw the stone which I had just left standing upright, and the dead person appeared. A naked skeleton that was pushing the stone back with its bent back. I saw it clearly, although the night was dark. On the cross I read, "Here lies Jacques Oliphant, who died at the age of 51. He loved his family, was kind and honorable, and died in the peace of the Lord." The dead man also read what was inscribed on his tombstone. Then he picked up a stone off the path, a little pointed stone, and began to scrape the letters carefully. He slowly effaced them together, and with the hollows of his eyes, he looked at the places where they had been engraved, and, with the tip of the bone that had been his forefinger, he wrote in luminous letters, like those lines which one traces on walls with the tip of a lucifer match. "Here reposes Jacques Oliphant, who died at the age of 51. He hastened his father's death by his unkindness, as he wished to inherit his fortune. He tortured his wife, tormented his children, deceived his neighbors, robbed everyone he could, and died wretched." When he had finished writing, the dead man stood motionless, looking at his work, and on turning round, I saw that all the graves were open, that all the dead bodies had emerged from them, and that all had effaced the lies inscribed on the gravestones by their relations, and had substituted the truth instead. And I saw that all had been the tormentors of their neighbors, malicious, dishonest, hypocrites, liars, rogues, calumniators, envious, that they had stolen, deceived, performed every disgraceful, every abominable action. These good fathers, these faithful wives, these devoted sons, these chaste young girls, these honest tradesmen, these men and women who were called irreproachable, and they were all writing at the same time, on the threshold of their eternal abode, the truth, the cruel, terrible, and holy truth, which everyone on earth is ignorant of, or pretends to ignore. I thought that she also must have written something on her tombstone. And now, running without any fear among the half-open coffins, among the corpses and skeletons, I went toward her, sure that I should find her immediately. I recognized her at once, without seeing her face, which was covered by the winding sheet, and on the marble cross, where shortly before I had read, "She loved, was beloved, and died," I now read, "Having gone out one day, in order to deceive her lover, she caught cold in the rain and died." It appears that they found me at daybreak, lying on the grave, unconscious.